Hollywood actors on strike. Welcome to Beyond Film School. I'm Amber, where I teach you all about the film industry, and we are breaking down why the actors are currently on strike. As of July 13th of this year, 2023, SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA, are on strike alongside the WGA, the Writers Guild of America, who have been on strike since May 2nd of this year. The last time the Screen Actors Guild went on strike was in 1980, and now during this time, 1980 VHS tapes were booming.
What's VHS?
That was a huge thing that was growing at the time. In addition to that, so was cable television. These were revenue streams at the time that were making some serious dough with no cut for the actors, and they wanted their piece of the pie. From the perspective of SAG members that year, they did not come to a good enough deal after 3 months of striking. Now going back even further to 1960, when both the actors and the writers were on strike at the same time. The actors, who were led by Ronald Reagan, who was president of SAG that year, they wanted residuals for movies that were going to television. On the other side of the strike with the writers, they were looking to increase their wages. They wanted residuals for television reruns, and they also wanted the studios to pay into the health and pension plan. The actors' strike that year only lasted 5 weeks, resulting in them getting residuals for films, but only from 1960 and forward, and they wouldn't do anything on the back end. Anything that came before 1960, they were not paying actors any residuals for that. And they also got a nice lump sum from the studios. $2.25 million went into their health and pension. Now with the writers, they were on strike just under 6 months, and that resulted in 1.2% of residuals for any of the movies that went to TV. They received 4% residuals for TV reruns, and they also got an independent pension plan. They also got participation in the industry health insurance plan. Now notice in the 1960 strike, syndication was really the item in question that was making a ton of money for the studios, and the writers and the actors were not being compensated. And if you don't know what syndication is basically, you have a show, let's just say CBS makes that show, now it airs on CBS, but maybe after a couple seasons, they drop that show, they cancel the show, they don't want to make the show anymore, they package that show, they sell it to another network, maybe they sell it to TBS, or maybe they sell it to Netflix. That is syndication. They're taking that show, they're selling it somewhere else, and now it can be viewed reruns for as long as you'd like. Syndication started in the 1950s, but started to really grow in the 1960s. We can thank Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz for this, because they were the first ones to do it with their show. It's basically the foundation of all syndication today. What they did with the I Love Lucy show, the rerun was birthed from that show. And this fight continues today with the current strike. There is a new way of making money, streaming services. Now, I say new because we've known streaming for at least a decade, maybe a decade and a half, so it's not really new. And when it first came out as new media, which they don't really use it anymore, we were trying to find a way to pay people to make the thing. Now we've figured that out, and now it's the residual fight for the streaming services.
We really need to figure this out, guys.
Again, the studios and the producers have figured out another way to make crazy money and not compensate the writers and the actors appropriately. So what are the actors asking for in this strike? The first thing is going to be a raise in basic wage. This is usually talked about every contract year, every 3 years, every contract. They always want to compensate for inflation to make sure everyone has a basic living wage. Now I say basic living wage because it is kind of tying into the streaming residual argument, because they're fighting so hard for residuals, because now most TV shows are not shot 23 episodes long. They're shot 8 episodes, 10 episodes, 13 if you're lucky. There's longer stretches of unemployment between each show that they work on. So that's why the fight for residuals is pretty fierce. So the other thing they're fighting for, like I mentioned, is streaming residuals. Now there was a system in place that handled residuals on streaming services and syndication, right? So let's just say, for example, Netflix wants to show Friends on their platform, right? And the sale of how many years they have the right to show Friends on Netflix would be this lump sum or whatever that would be chopped up into little pieces, and that would be the actors or the writers' residuals percentage. From there, it would be a decreasing percentage. So let's just say 1 year after Friends ended or 2 years after, the percentage keeps decreasing and decreasing and just getting smaller and smaller. And that's why you have the stories of people getting 1 penny checks or 4-cent checks for their residuals.
Are those 3 SAG after checks on my table? Let me open them up. That's the first check. That's the second check. And that's the third check. And that's why we gonna strike.
It wasn't based off subscribers. It wasn't based off how many times you watched an episode. It wasn't based on how many minutes of that episode someone watched, which is bananas. Another thing that the actors are fighting for are limits on self-taping. Just a few days ago, I had a friend of mine post about her self-tape. They wanted her to have a self-tape of 17 pages of script, but the deadline for a self-tape was 2 hours. I'm sorry, what? I can't even make a 10-minute YouTube video in 2 hours. 17 pages in 2 hours, I'm sorry, no.
How about no?
And of course, the hot new item on the docket of things that the actors are fighting for addresses generative AI. Would you allow the studios to just take your face and your voice and use it forever and infinitely over whatever they wanted for 1 day of pay? You crazy! You're probably saying no to that, and I understand why you're saying no to that, because it's like, that's crazy. I want to be paid every time my image is used, right? At least that. But also consent to use it for certain things, because that is also something that is coming into play of like, where are you gonna use my image and my voice? We've all seen the Black Mirror episode, Jane is Awful. If you haven't, please do.
Oh my god, she even has your hair.
The AMPTP definitely suggested that they do this for background actors, which if you think about it, if they keep doing this over time, then ultimately they won't need any background actors. I think that proposal is absolutely crazy. Like, astoundingly crazy. Right, it might just be me, I don't know.
It's creepy.
What I want people to realize is that those super famous actors that are making millions per show or per movie, you know, you're like Viola Davis, Keanu Reeves, Margot Robbie, Tom Hanks, like those superstars are 1%. They're the top 1% of SAG. SAG has 160,000 members. And that's comprised of background actors, voice actors, actors you have never even seen or heard of. What they're fighting for right now is not for the superstars. They have these big giant contracts. They're fighting for the ones trying to fight to just get middle class status. They're worried about everybody else, the other 99%. So when is this strike gonna end? People are predicting, now this is all just hearsay from the rumor mill, which honestly seems to be pretty accurate nowadays. Everyone's saying September. Take that for what it is. But also keep in mind that crazy deadline article that came out just maybe a week ago, just a few days ago, where a source from the AMPTP was saying that they want to drag this out and really hurt the writers as much as possible. They want to drag it out and drain them until they start losing apartments or the writers start losing houses, which is pretty crazy. And they were saying that October-ish. So September, October might be when we get back to work. I'm not sure. That is, take that for what it is. They can play chicken with the writers, but they cannot do it with the actors. And why is that? Just because we're not shooting things doesn't mean there isn't movies coming out. Now, the delay of movies being released hasn't happened because the strike hasn't gone on that long. They need the actors to promote the movies that are still coming out. While the strike is going on, the actors cannot promote. My prediction is that the AMPTP is definitely gonna talk to the actors first, get them squared away and settled, and then they're gonna go to the writers, and then the writers will settle probably sometime after that. Now, because if you think about it, back when it just was a couple months ago, when it was just the writers on strike, things were still shooting. Very little amount of things shooting, but things were still shooting. I mean, with the actors on strike, massive Hollywood shutdown all around the US and actually outside of the US, because there are productions that are overseas that use SAG actors. It's a lot of different things, and I know currently they're thinking about if something is very independent and not a studio show or a studio film, that they're willing to give waivers for SAG actors to work on those independent things. So those things still might be shooting, but a lot of it is gone away. The work is just gone right now, and we're just waiting it out. Just waiting it out. Also keep in mind for those who are influencers or whatever who are promoting studio movies right now, SAG is taking a tally and a list and they're gonna find out who you are, and if you want to be a part of SAG or an actor one day, you will not be able to join their membership. This is very, very similar to the WGA, the Writers Guild of America. They find out that you are writing anything for the studios, you will not be allowed membership, you will not gain membership from them. Don't be a scab, guys. Just don't do it. Just don't be a scab. Don't cross the picket lines. Don't do it. I definitely think the actors are gonna come to a deal before the writers. If I think about it logically, I would think that since the writers went on strike first, that since the actors just went on strike, the writers will go back to the table, but I don't for some reason think that's gonna happen like that. During this production pause, I encourage you to use this time wisely. Use it for gaining a new skill, networking, making connections, I don't know, visiting family, getting back to basics, working on you. And the good thing about it is that there's not a friggin' pandemic that's keeping us from face-to-face events. So get out there, use this time to just, I don't know, expand your circle and learn a new thing or learn something new about you. So I want to get back to work. I definitely know we all want to get back to work, but not before the WGA and SAG get a fair deal.